Hi, this is Mr. Russell. We're going to do a review on Unit 2, which is, CPI, inflation, GDP, and all those good stuff with a lot of formulas. I would truly recommend for you to pause the video, go to the topics page, and take outline review final 2. Outline to review the final 2. So it's the second review outline for the final. It's under the topics page. It'll allow you to go along. I think it'll make it easier. I'm going to give you definitely when we talk about real GDP per capita, that will be on the quiz. All you'll have to know is real GDP per capita equal real GDP divided by population. That will definitely give you a question. I think the question is almost just like that, the definition. So if we're watching the video, there you get that. But anyhow, let me just go over the formulas because I think they're important. You, of course, need to have them memorized. The first one is the velocity of money. So it's M, which is money, times V, which is velocity, equals P, which is price level, times Y, which is output. Now, Y is also real GDP because real GDP is output. P times Y is nominal GDP. So a lot of times they'll ask you, they'll give you all the numbers and they'll ask you what the real GDP is, that'd be Y. What the nominal is, that's P times Y. Sometimes they give you all three of these and they ask you to fill in the 4. If they're asking you, again, to find real GDP, and they might give you like quantity sold. So it's the quantity of the year, say 2013, times the price of the base year, say 2012 is the base year. All right, where nominal GDP is the price of the year times the quantity of that year. All right, so real GDP is, do we make more or less product? Nominal GDP is, do we make more or less product and do prices go up or down? So nominal takes both. All right, I talked about real GDP per capita. It's the best indication on productivity, all right? Because it's not that we make a lot because we have the most people, but how much do we make per person, all right? So it's real GDP divided by population. GDP deflator is, and I'll talk about the CPI index in later, but it's a way to determine inflation. So it's nominal over real times 100. Nominal GDP over real GDP times 100. All right, unemployment rate. There's always a question on the AP exam on unemployment rate. There'll be a question on the final. It's unemployed over labor force. The key is remembering it's over labor force, and the labor force is employed and unemployed times 100. All right, so it's unemployment slash labor over the labor force, and the labor force is employed and unemployed times 100. And then labor participation equals labor force divided by the adult population times 100. All right, so those are some of the key formulas you'll need for this unit. Again, I'm guaranteeing on the quiz a real GDP question. So that's one. I'm going to give you another answer later on in the review. All right, for all countries, there are 3 major economic goals. That's what this unit's about. Promote economic growth. That's where we'll talk about GDP. Prevent unemployment. We'll talk about unemployment coming up. And then keys, price, keeping prices stable. Now we'll talk about CPI index. Who gets helped and hurt by inflation? GDP deflator. Okay? All right. So what do we really need here? What I want you in this slide is to take away GDP is the dollar value of all final goods produced within the borders in 1 year. All right. So dollar value, GDP is measured in dollars. Second, final goods. Remember, that's not intermediate goods. So if I'm building a car, the tires that Goodyear sells to Ford, that is not part of the GDP. Why? Because the price of those tires go into the total price of the car. All right. So when we're looking at what's GDP, final goods, goods sold like to the customer, the final sale. So the flour that makes bread, okay? If I sell flour at the bakery, that's not part of GDP because the bread is going to be, include the price of the flour. However, if I sell flour to like a household, if my wife goes and buys flour at the grocery store, that is GDP because that's the final sale. Okay, usually within a year. Now, the percentage change in GDP is like the percentage change in anything. It's year 2 minus year 1 over year 1 times 100. All right. So anytime they're asking for a percentage change, I just put GDP here. It's year 2 minus year 1 over year 1 times 100. And that happens a lot with inflation. Like if they ask you for the inflation rate, it's year 2 minus year 1 over year 1 times 100. All right. So what is economic? It's an increase in real GDP over time. Why real GDP? Because real GDP measures how much products you're making. All right. So economic growth is, do I produce more? Now, graphically, it would be shifting the LRAS to the right. Economic growth on the production possibilities curve is shifting the production possibilities curve outward. All right. So economic growth is a long run phenomenon. Okay. Now, an increase of real GDP per capita. Remember, we've talked about that with formulas. Real GDP per capita is real GDP over population. All right. Again, I said that would be a question on the quiz. Now, what is not included in GDP? Intermediate goods. I talked about that already. That's not part of GDP. All right. So we're only taking final goods. All right, like a radio. Now, if a radio is sold to me as a consumer, then it is part of GDP. But if it's sold to Ford, who then puts it in a car, the car is the final product. All right, non-production transactions. So stocks, bonds, not part of GDP. All right, used goods, a used car, not part of GDP. A used house, not part of GDP. Okay. And then any illegal activities. All right. Then household goods. So what I mean, like if you do something like if you're taking care of your own house, like if you're mowing the lawn or doing something like at your house for free, that's not part of GDP. Transfer payments. Again, what are transfer payments? That would be like Social Security. Why? Because you're not getting, the government's not getting the goods and service for unemployment. Again, not a goods or service. Welfare. They're getting nothing for the money. So transfer payments not included in GDP. And anything outside the country. All right, so if something's made in Japan, even if it's made by a U.S. citizen, it's not part of GDP. All right, so there's two approaches. There's this expenditure approach and there's the income approach. All right, we generally emphasize the expenditure approach. But remember, expenditures equal income. So if real GDP increases, income in the United States increases. And that's why on the graph of aggregate demand, short-run aggregate supply, if real GDP increases, income increases, and employment increases. All right? So here's the four components. There is consumer spending, consumption. That's the one you know. You know, you go to the store, you buy something, I have a $5 little slice of pizza there. Investments, all right? Investments are not stocks and bonds. It's where businesses are buying things to help their business. Like they might be buying tractors, they might be buying equipment, they might be building factories. Those are all investments. Now, there's a couple of things that go under the investment category that's a little different. One is buying a new house, all right? That goes under investment. The second is inventory. So Ford doesn't sell a car in 2020, they put it in inventory. That goes under investment. All right. Those are the two tricky ones: houses, all right, and inventory. The third is government spending. All right, government spending, like military, building roads, building schools, anything that the government spends that they get a good and service for return. So again, not Trent. Social Security, no, not part of government spending. Okay. However, military, yes. All right. Roads, yes. And I put bombs and tanks. All right. And then net exports. So just remember, so a lot of times they give you a chart. I think I even did this on one of the practice questions the other day. They want you to figure out the GDP. Remember, it's exports minus imports. Okay, it's net exports, exports minus imports. And now you are familiar that consumption, investment, government, those are all shifters of aggregate demand. All four of them shift aggregate demand. Okay. All right, so GDP is a consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. Again, those are the four shifters of aggregate demand. Okay. Here we go. All right, nominal GDP is measured in current prices. So it would be 20,021 price times 20,021 quantity. That gives you nominal GDP. What's the problem with nominal? You don't know what went up. Like if I see nominal GDP in 2020 is 10 million and now it's 12, I don't know, did the prices go up or did we produce more output? So nominal GDP isn't very good at telling me, are we producing more? Real GDP is expressed in unchanging dollars. What do I mean by that? It's 2021's quantity times base year's prices. So say the base year is 2020, it'd be the quantity in 2021 times the base year price. So since the base year price stays the same, if real GDP increases, I know I had to produce more. If real GDP decreases, I know I had to produce less. Okay? And real GDP is the best measure of economic growth, and we talked about earlier real GDP per capita, which is real GDP divided by population, is the best indicator. Okay? And kind of here is just what I said in kind of an example. If we're taking the nominal GDP, you look at 2004, then in 2005, while I produced the same 10 cars and 10 trucks, nominal went up to 370. Now, when I see 370 compared to 350, I don't have this breakdown. I really don't know what happened. You know, GDP went up 20,000. Could have been prices. It could have been, produced more. I don't know. Notice the real GDP is the same. Why? Because I'm taking the 10 cars and I'm timesing it by the base year 2004's prices. All right. So there, when I take 350 real, I can compare it and say we didn't produce more. All right. So it just had to be inflation. All right. Here's the business cycle. Hard to think of what they could ask you on the business cycle. But let me leave that back up there. Just know, I think like a recession is a 6-month period of decline. They could ask you that. Knowing the peak, just think the peak is an inflationary gap on your SRASAT. So you're going to have high inflation, low unemployment. And a recession is a recessionary gap. So you're going to have low price levels and high unemployment. And the full employment line is like the LRAS curve. All right. So, when you're at the peak, you're to the right, you're lower than the natural rate of unemployment for full employment. And then here in the trough, you're higher. Okay. Now, unemployment. All right. So first, the unemployment rate. There it is. Again, unemployment rate, unemployed over the labor force. Remember, the labor force is unemployed and employed. You have to have both times 100. They usually ask a question like this. It's easy if you know the formula, and the tricky part, most people put unemployed over employed. That's where guys make a mistake. Remember, the labor force is unemployed plus employed. Okay. What is the labor force? Got to be above 60 years old. Able and willing to work. Stay-at-home mom, not part of the labor force. Why? She's not willing to work. Discouraged worker, not part of the labor force. Okay? Why? Because they're not looking to work. All right? Now, unemployment looks better when discouraged workers stop looking for jobs. That's one of the problems of the unemployment. Okay? That discouraged workers lower the unemployment rate, lower the labor participation rate. Okay? So it changes the outlook there. All right, if you're in jails and hospitals, not in military and school. And by the way, like they like to do that they like to make questions like this. So let's just say there was 15. So unemployment would be 15%. Now they might say if 10 people were discouraged, what does that do to the unemployment rate? So this would be 15%. Now, if 10 people were discouraged, so now 5 people are unemployed because those discouraged workers aren't looking for work anymore, so we don't consider them unemployed. All right, and they're not part of the labor force, right? Because the labor force is unemployed and employed, so that'd be 5 over 90, and that's about 5.5%. So you notice that discouraged workers lowered the unemployment rate, and that's one of the problems with unemployment. So if they ever give you a problem, I just put like make up numbers in there, and I see what happens, and it helps me answer the question. Okay, and I know there's a question like that on your quiz. So there's your second. If you stayed here and you've got it. Okay. All right. Labor force participation is labor force over the adult population. Okay. And again, I would do the same thing if they gave me, you know, an example. So if it's like 50 over 100, so the labor force is 50 over 100, that would be 50%. And say 10 people became discouraged, that would make it 40 over 90. So, I mean, 45 over 90 would be 50, so this is lower. So discouraged workers also lower the labor participation rate, right? So that's just an easy way to try to figure those out. All right. And I hate memorization, but you do have to memorize those formulas, all right? So again, I would say both these are going to be on the quiz. So just memorize the formulas, and that's question 2. All right, now they always ask a question like this on the AP exam. They're meant to be easy, but you have to know them, okay, the 3 types of unemployment. The first is frictional, all right? So what is frictional? Those are short term. That's you're graduating high school and you're looking for a job. You graduate college, you're looking for a job. You quit a job for a better job. You have skills, you're going to be employed, you're just in between jobs, okay? So that is short term. Now, a part of frictional is seasonal. So this is still like 1, frictional, A, seasonal, all right? Seasonal is just what it says. You're a lifeguard, you're unemployed, okay? In the winter, you're a Santa Claus, you're unemployed in the summer, all right? So these are just seasonal and you're unemployed. The second is structural. Structural is more long-term, all right? It's when you have more workers than you have jobs, all right? And you don't have transferable skills. So there's a couple of, like, technology replaces you. They take your a line worker for Ford in Michigan and they transfer the plant to Mexico. That's structural because your skill as a line worker, you have no other skill. Minimum wage is structural, all right? Because if you increase minimum wage, you have more workers wanting to work than you have jobs. So those are structural unemployment, okay? And then you have the third is cyclical, right? So cyclical is any time you're to the left of the LRAS curve. So cyclical is unemployment due to economic downturns. So you would say during COVID, like last year, people weren't going out, so people weren't going to restaurants and stuff like that. So they had to lay off staff. That's cyclical, right? So again, that would be like to the left of the LRAS curve is cyclical unemployment. And there's a couple of examples. And by the way, like I said, restaurant owners, and that was a big one during COVID. And there was a lot of layoffs and unemployment that got to, like, you know, in the high 20s because of COVID. All right, now full employment. So full employment is frictional and structural unemployment. And there is always frictional and structural unemployment. Why? People are always looking for new jobs. People are always looking to get better. There's always technology that's replacing jobs. All right. There's always companies moving from one place to another that causes structural unemployment. Full employment, or, you know, which is frictional structural, that is the LRAS curve. All right. So that is 4 to 6%. So it could be considered full employment or the natural rate of unemployment. That is the LRAS curve. All right. All right. Okay. And there it is. Together they make up the natural rate of unemployment or full employment. Could be referred to. So the LRAS curve is full employment or the natural rate of unemployment and potential output. So that means at that spot, if we're maximizing our efficiency, that's what we could produce. Okay. All right. Okay. Again, so at the LRAS curve, there's no cyclical unemployment. To the left, there is cyclical unemployment. And in the United States, we generally go to 4 to 6%. Before COVID, we were under even 4%. All right, some criticisms of the unemployment rate. We talked about, I can misdiagnose the actual unemployment rate because of disgruntled job. So when you take them out of the workforce, I mean, they're not working, but we're not considering them unemployed because they stopped looking for jobs. Remember, you have to look for a job every 4 weeks to be considered unemployed. Part-time workers. So a part-time worker is considered employed, but maybe I'm working 20 hours and I want 50, or I need 50 to support my family. I'm being counted as employed, but I'm really not getting what I want. And then, you know, unemployment for minorities, teenagers, and is, you know, doesn't sometimes show that in your unemployment rate. Okay. And then unemployment, I might have a job, and some people are collecting unemployment and working for cash. So that's not it. All right, the inflation rate. All right, what is inflation? Price levels go up. That's all. So anytime on our graph, price levels go up, there's inflation. AD shifts right, price levels go up, that's inflation. Right? And then when price levels go up, in the short run, wages are sticky, so they don't go up, so purchasing power goes down. These are just kind of the examples, all right? Okay. So this is the first way, the most common is the CPI index, all right? And that's, like it says, it's the market basket of the 300 most commonly purchased goods. Some of those goods are like, it could be a foreign car or it could be something from foreign. It doesn't matter where it's the 300 most consumed goods. All right. All right. So the inflation rate, anytime you see inflation rate, year 2 minus year 1 over year 1 times 100. Year 2 minus year 1 over year 1 times 100. All right. All right. So I'm going to show you the CPI index in a second. And there is hyperinflation. That's kind of an inflation like I had. Olivia there is out of control. And here is the consumer price index. That is the basket we were talking about. And in the GDP deflator and the consumer price index, the base year is 100. Okay, and you're comparing things to the base year. Here is the CPI formula. It's price of the current basket over the base year, price of the base year basket times 100. So here, the market basket for 1997, movies are $6, pizza is 14. So the total would be 20. So if that's the base year, that's on the bottom. Here is 2005. So it'd be 25 over 20 times 100, and that's going to give you 125. Okay? Usually the numbers will be easily dividable because you're not allowed to use a calculator. So there it is. I think they'll do the CPI index and they'll give you questions like that on the AP exam. You just need to be able to remember current over base year times 100. All right. And again, this is an easy one, but if they were asking the inflation rate, it'd be year 2, which is 125 minus 100 over 100. Year 2 minus year 1 over, so it'd be 25 over 100 or 25%. All right. Anytime they ask you the inflation rate, again, it's year 2 minus year 1 over year 1 times 100. All right. The GDP deflator is nominal / over real times 100. All right. Now they're both inflation rates. If you back up the CPI index, what makes that the most used? It's because it's the common things that 300, the 300 most common. So that's a great indicator of inflation. Now, one of the problems of the CPI index, and this will be a question, so there on your quiz, take note, this is definitely a question. The CPI index, one of the problems is if pears go up, I might just buy apples instead. Like I might buy a substitute. So it's not really that good because I could buy a substitute. The second problem is quality. Sometimes the quality of the good increases. So maybe the price goes up, but it's not really inflation because I'm getting a better product for the price. So the quality of the product increases and the price stays the same. So actually I'm getting more value for my dollar. So the CPI doesn't take those two into consideration. All right. So that's it. Now, the GDP deflator, one of the problems is it's GDP. So it's only goods made in the United States. Second, like US tanks and airplanes are in there. And if there's inflation in tanks and airplanes, that doesn't really affect us as consumers. All right, so that's also put in there, even though consumers are not purchasing those types. So that's a disadvantage to the GDP deflator. All right, is inflation good or bad? The answer is it depends. Depends which side of the coin you're on, right? So who's hurt by inflation? Lenders, all right? Because lenders are getting paid back in dollars that buy less. So they're hurt by inflation. People with fixed incomes, if I'm making $20,000 a year, inflation hurts my purchasing power. So that's hurt. And then savers, because the banks never keep up with inflation. Debtors are helped because I'm paying back in cheaper dollars. All right. Businesses where the price of their, so if inflation's going up and I could charge more, but I have like labor contracted for a year, so their wages are frozen, that helps me because for a year I'm increasing my prices, I'm bringing in more revenue, and my cost is staying the same. Right? People who are unaffected, they have this cost of living adjustment. So that would mean if inflation goes up 2%, my salary goes up 2%. Right? So therefore, I'm not affected by inflation. All right, there are three causes of inflation. Okay. The first one is the government prints too much money. Right? And if you remember, M times V equal P. So money increases, velocity usually is constant, right? Because you printed more money, that didn't change output. So P is going to go up if you increase money. All right. The second is demand pull inflation. All right, and that is, there's too many dollars chasing too few goods. And that would happen, when you print too much money. That's going to have aggregate demand shifting right? Aggregate demand shifting right, driving prices up, all right? Because you're going to have a temporary shortage till people start producing more products. And then the third is cost push or stagflation, all right? That's when, like usually a negative supply shock causes higher production costs. So say like Middle East stops selling us oil. So the supply of oil decreases, shifts supply, short on average supply left, prices go up and output down. So cost push inflation / stagflation, they're the same thing, all right? There's always a question on the AP exam on cost push inflation, stagflation. There'll be a question on the final exam, definitely on cost push inflation and stagflation. Okay. All right. That ends the review. There'll be 12 multiple choice questions. When you come back, there'll be a quiz on just this. All right. Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of your holiday.